Mafia boss, married pregnant teen. No one dared to touch. The reason why will break your heart. On the coldest night outside a closed clinic, a ruthless king of the city stops a pack of enforcers with one look, then signs a midnight marriage to put a shield around a shaking girl and the life she's carrying. Everyone whispers that no one dares to touch her, but not out of mercy. 500 black roses arrive with razor-wired stems. A shooter waits in a garage. A hidden camera blinks inside the walls, and a stolen ring points to a truth so ugly it could burn 2 empires at once. He fights like a storm to protect her. She refuses to break, even when the room spins and the past claws back. But when the masks come off, the real monster isn't who the city thinks. And the vow, no one touches you, not even me, becomes the most dangerous promise of all. Who put that ring on the attacker's hand? Why did a whole city step back from one girl? And when the truth finally hits the light, will this marriage save them? Or start a war no one can survive? Lightning split the sky, illuminating Mara's pale face as she pressed herself against the cold brick wall of the shuttered clinic. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she cradled her swollen belly, rainwater streaming down her face. 3 hulking figures in dark suits blocked any escape, their shoulders hunched against the downpour. "The boss wants a word," one growled, reaching for her arm. The screech of tires cut through the rain. A black sedan pulled up, its headlights cutting through the darkness. The back door opened smoothly, and a man stepped out with deliberate grace. Even through the rain, his presence commanded attention. The Calderon enforcers straightened instantly, their aggressive postures melting into something closer to fear. Adrian Wolfe didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Step back." 2 words, spoken softly, yet the enforcers retreated, as if pushed by an invisible force. His steel-gray eyes found Mara's, assessing. She lifted her chin, fighting to keep her terror hidden, though her hands trembled where they protected her unborn child. "Miss Quinn?" His voice was cool, controlled. "I have a proposition that solves both our problems." Inside the courthouse, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across worn linoleum floors. Mara's wet clothes clung uncomfortably as she watched Adrian speak quietly with a clerk who seemed ready to leave for the night. Money changed hands, more than a simple filing fee, she was certain. The clerk's stamp crashed down on their marriage license with mechanical finality. The sound echoed in the empty hallway like a judge's gavel, sealing her fate. They stood before a jaded justice of the peace, who rushed through the ceremony with the enthusiasm of someone eager to get home. Adrian's responses were precise, each, "I do," delivered like a business agreement. Mara forced her voice not to waver as she repeated the traditional words, acutely aware of how her second-hand dress dripped onto the floor. The ring Adrian slid onto her finger was heavy platinum, obviously expensive but understated. It felt like a shackle and a shield all at once. Mara kept her head high, refusing to let her fear show, even as her pulse raced beneath her skin. In the fluorescent-lit hallway afterward, Adrian turned to her. His face remained impassive, but something in his eyes softened fractionally. The Calderon family has significant legal resources. They would have found ways around restraining orders, police reports, witness protection. He stated these facts without emotion. "As my wife, you have the protection of my name, my lawyers, and the church's influence. The street understands certain codes about family." Mara wrapped her arms around herself, the ring catching the harsh light. "And what do you want in return?" "Nothing you're not willing to give." His voice remained steady. "I'll maintain separate quarters unless you indicate otherwise. You'll have full access to medical care, security, and whatever resources you need for the child. I ask only that you remain within the protection I can provide." Before she could respond, he gestured toward the exit where a line of black SUVs waited, their engines idling. The rain had settled into a steady rhythm, drumming against the courthouse roof. Adrian held an umbrella over her as they walked to the vehicles, his other hand hovering near, but never touching her back. The driver opened the door, and Mara slid into the leather interior, still warm despite the chill night. As the convoy pulled away from the courthouse, Mara watched the city lights blur through rain-streaked windows. The wipers moved in a steady rhythm, marking time like a metronome. Each sweep seemed to whisper, "No going back, no going back." The familiar streets she'd known all her life began to fade away, replaced by manicured landscapes and iron gates. Her hand drifted to her stomach, feeling the gentle movement within. The baby had been restless all evening, as if sensing the monumental shift in their lives. Adrian sat beside her, maintaining a careful distance. His presence filled the car nonetheless, controlled power held in check. He made no attempt at small talk, allowing her space to process the enormity of what had just happened. Through the windshield, Mara caught glimpses of his estate growing larger as they approached. Stone walls rose from manicured grounds, security lights cutting through the rain to illuminate a fortress disguised as a mansion. The gates opened silently for their convoy, cameras tracking their progress up the winding drive. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass, watching her old life disappear in the side mirror. The wipers continued their steady beat, each sweep reminding her that she'd traded one form of danger for another. The cage might be gilded, might even be safer than the streets she'd left behind, but it was a cage, nonetheless. The baby kicked again, and Mara tightened her arms around her middle. She'd done this for her child, she reminded herself. Better a cage with protection than freedom with constant fear. Still, as the mansion's shadows loomed closer, she couldn't help wondering if she'd just made a deal with a different kind of devil. The convoy came to a smooth stop under a covered portico. Through the rain-spotted windows, uniformed staff waited with umbrellas at the ready. Mara caught her reflection in the glass. Pale face, wet hair, eyes wide but chin still lifted in defiance. Behind her, Adrian's reflection watched her with unreadable eyes, patient and still, like a predator who could afford to wait. The first rays of dawn painted the sky as the convoy passed through massive iron gates. The metal groaned shut behind them with finality, security systems re-engaging with soft electronic chirps. Mara barely had time to take in the sprawling estate before a small welcoming committee descended. "Mrs. Wolfe!" A silver-haired woman in crisp medical scrubs stepped forward. "I'm Dr. Chen. Let's get you settled and checked over." Two guards flanked the entrance, their stances casual but eyes constantly scanning. A petite housekeeper with an efficient demeanor introduced herself as Mrs. Ellis, already cataloging Mara's needs with practiced assessment. Adrian's hand ghosted near Mara's elbow, but never made contact. "I have matters to attend to. They'll see to your comfort." Without waiting for a response, he strode away, his footsteps echoing down marble halls. The tour felt surreal. Her bedroom suite was larger than her entire apartment, decorated in muted grays and blues. Blackout curtains hung like velvet waterfalls, and the bed could have slept six. Mrs. Ellis demonstrated the whisper-quiet intercom system, while Dr. Chen eyed Mara's pale complexion with professional concern. "The bathroom has been stocked with pregnancy-safe products," Mrs. Ellis explained, opening doors to reveal a spa-like space with heated floors and a soaking tub. "And we've prepared a menu addressing common pregnancy aversions." After they left, Mara stood in the center of rooms she'd never asked for, listening to the hollow tick of an antique clock. The space felt both luxurious and clinical, like an expensive hospital suite. Her few belongings looked pathetic, unpacked into the massive closet. Unable to rest, she ventured into the corridors. The house stretched endlessly, all hardwood and marble, security cameras discreetly tracking her movement. Through one door, she glimpsed Adrian in what appeared to be a command center, surrounded by maps and screens displaying data she couldn't comprehend. His expression was cold as winter as he spoke into a phone, not acknowledging her presence. Her wandering led her to a sealed room. Through leaded glass panels, she saw the distinctive silhouette of a grand piano beneath dust covers. The door was locked, but something about the untouched. Silence within called to her like a secret waiting to be discovered. "The music room hasn't been opened in years." The voice behind her was cultured, precise. She turned to find a man in an immaculate suit, tablet in hand. "Tomasz Halle, consigliere to Mr. Wolfe." Before she could respond, another voice cut in. "Checking out the haunted wing already?" A younger man sauntered up, his entire bearing suggesting barely contained amusement. "Cade Moretti. I handle the fun stuff Tommy here considers beneath his dignity." "By fun stuff, he means street-level enforcement," Tomasz clarified with a slight frown. "Mrs. Ellis mentioned lunch is ready, Mrs. Wolfe." The formal dining room could have hosted state dinners, but they'd set a single place at the massive table. Mrs. Ellis hovered nearby as Mara attempted the carefully prepared soup, monitoring for any sign of nausea. The baby had been active all morning, making it difficult to eat. The house settled into afternoon quiet. Mara caught glimpses of activity. Guards changing shifts, staff moving efficiently through their tasks, Tomasz's measured stride as he carried documents to Adrian's office, Cade's louder presence directing something in the garage. She felt like a ghost, haunting spaces that belonged to someone else's life. Hours crawled past. The sunset, painting the manicured grounds in deep shadows. Security lights clicked on automatically, creating a perimeter of artificial day. Mara had just changed into a borrowed nightgown when Adrian finally returned. He appeared in the doorway of the small sitting room where she'd been pretending to read. His suit was impeccable, except for a small splash of rust brown on one French cuff. Blood. Her mind supplied unwillingly. Yet in his hand was a neat row of prenatal vitamins arranged on a small silver tray. "Did the soup stay down?" he asked, voice neutral as he set the vitamins beside her water glass. The contradiction of it, the violence on his sleeve and the careful attention to her nutrition made her skin prickle. She nodded stiffly, not trusting her voice. He accepted this with a slight inclination of his head and withdrew, his footsteps fading down the hall. She hadn't thanked him. He hadn't seemed to expect it. Later, alone in her new bedroom, Mara tested the balcony doors. They opened smoothly to the cool night air, but when she pulled them closed again, she heard the distinctive sound of hydraulics engaging. Another security system, another lock. The entire estate was designed to keep things in as much as keep threats out. She pressed her forehead against the glass, one hand cradling her stomach where the baby shifted restlessly. "We won't stay forever," she whispered to both of them. "Just until you're safe. Just until I find a way." But the locks whispered back with electronic certainty, and the night beyond the gates stretched dark and wide. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the estate's manicured lawn when the delivery truck arrived. At first, Mrs. Ellis thought it was another shipment of baby supplies, but the workers dumped their cargo unceremoniously at the gate. 500 black roses, their thorny stems gleaming with an unnatural metallic sheen. Tomasz reached for one, his usually composed face tightening as hidden razor wire sliced into his palm. Blood welled from the precise cut, and he withdrew a cream-colored card from among the deadly blooms. His expression darkened as he read the message. "She doesn't leave. She returns." The roses were cleared away within minutes, security teams photographing and documenting each detail before destruction. But the message lingered like poison in the air. Adrian's office door opened with quiet authority. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair across his desk. Mara settled into the leather seat, one hand instinctively resting on her stomach. The baby had been restless all day, as if sensing the tension radiating through the house. "I need to explain something," Adrian began, his voice clinical and detached. "There's a reason no one dared touch you on the streets before I found you." His fingers drummed once on his desk, the only tell of contained anger. "The Calderones didn't spare you out of mercy." Mara's throat tightened. "What do you mean?" "They marked you as untouchable because they wanted you pristine, unspoiled." His jaw clenched. They were keeping their asset clean until retrieval. The implications hit her like ice water. All those weeks, she'd thought she was flying under the radar, surviving by wit and luck. She'd been tagged the whole time, watched, preserved like a specimen in amber. Adrian's phone buzzed. He checked it, his expression hardening further. "Security rotations are being doubled. You have a clinic appointment this evening, prenatal checkup, blood work, full screening." He pulled a burner phone from his desk drawer and slid it across to her. "You call me if anyone so much as breathes near you. Understood?" She nodded, fingers closing around the cheap plastic device. It felt like a lifeline and a shackle all at once. The sun had set by the time they headed to the clinic, the city's lights creating an artificial twilight that felt hostile and alien. Adrian's security detail moved with practiced efficiency, clearing paths and checking sightlines as they made their way to the underground garage. The space was vast and eerily quiet, their footsteps echoing off concrete walls. Security lights cast stark shadows between the pillars. Adrian's hand rested at the small of her back, guiding her toward the armored Mercedes. The movement was so fast, Mara barely registered it. A figure in black stepping out from behind a pillar, the metallic glint of a gun, the deafening crack of shots fired in the enclosed space. Adrian's body slammed into hers, spinning them both as he returned fire one-handed. His other arm locked around her waist, half carrying her toward the car as alarms began to shriek through the, garage. "Get in!" he ordered, shoving her through the driver's side door and across the console. She scrambled into the passenger seat as he dropped behind the wheel, engine roaring to life. More shots pinged off the bulletproof glass as they accelerated toward the exit. "You're hit!" Mara gasped, seeing the dark stain spreading across his shoulder. The bullet had caught him high on the left side, blood already soaking through his expensive suit jacket. "Press down," he instructed tersely, handling the powerful car one-handed as they burst out onto the street. She leaned across, pushing both hands against the wound as he ran red lights and took corners at dangerous speeds. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing fainter as they put distance between themselves and the garage. Blood seeped warm between her fingers despite the pressure. Adrian's face remained composed, but she could see the muscle ticking in his jaw, the slight sheen of sweat at his temples. The The city blurred past their windows, a maze of neon and shadows, each street looking more threatening than the last. The baby kicked, a sharp reminder under her ribs. Mara realized her own hands were steady despite everything. Muscle memory from years of patching up injuries in back alleys and makeshift clinics. "The bullet's still in there," she said, feeling the heat and swelling around the entry wound. "You need—" "Later!" Adrian cut her off, taking another corner at speed. His good hand was white-knuckled on the steering wheel. "Keep pressure!" Red brake lights reflected off wet pavement, casting crimson shadows across their faces. Mara's fingers were slick with his blood, and she could feel his heartbeat hammering under her palms. The only outward sign that the ice-cold boss was human after all. They wove through traffic like a shark through dark water, predatory and purposeful. Adrian drove as if the bullet was merely an inconvenience, but Mara could feel the growing tension in his muscles, the way each breath came a little more controlled. The wound continued to bleed steadily under her hands, hot and vital against the chill of the air-conditioned car. Street signs and traffic signals streaked past in a blur of color and motion. Mara lost track of their turns and doublings back, focused only on maintaining pressure on Adrian's shoulder and the steady thrum of the engine as they cut through the hostile night. The estate's medical room gleamed with sterile efficiency, the overhead lights casting harsh shadows across stainless steel surfaces. Adrian sat shirtless on the examination table, his muscled torso marred by the angry red wound high on his shoulder. The house surgeon moved with practiced precision, arranging instruments on a metal cart while Mara watched from her position near the door. Something caught her eye, a glint that seemed wrong, out of place. She stepped closer, pretending to examine the medical supplies, while her gaze fixed on what appeared to be a pinhole camera, embedded in the cart's frame. Years of survival instincts kicked in, and her eyes began scanning methodically, catching a rhythmic blink from inside a cabinet hinge. Her heart rate quickened, but her voice remained steady. "I can finish the stitches." The surgeon paused, looking between her and Adrian with barely concealed displeasure. "Mrs. Wolfe, I assure you—" "Let her," Adrian interrupted, his eyes meeting Mara's. There was something in his gaze, recognition of her unspoken warning. Tomasz materialized in the doorway, silent as a shadow. Mara nodded almost imperceptibly, and he began a careful sweep of the room while she pulled on latex gloves and threaded the curved needle. Her hands were steady as she began suturing, each stitch precise and even. Adrian's skin was warm under her fingers, his breathing controlled and shallow. She could feel his pulse through the wound, strong, steady, alive. "You don't flinch," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear as she worked. Mara tied off another stitch before answering. "I can't afford to." Without breaking rhythm, she tilted her head slightly toward the metal cart. "There's a camera in the frame, and the cabinet. Something's blinking." Adrian went impossibly still beneath her hands. Cade, who had been lounging against the wall, straightened immediately. With controlled violence, he crossed the room and ripped the cabinet clean from its mounting. Behind it, a small transmitter pulsed with malicious purpose, wired into what looked like standard procurement equipment. "It's running through one of your shell companies," Tomasz reported quietly, examining the device. "The trust network you established 3 years ago." His implications hung heavy in the air. This betrayal came from inside their inner circle. Adrian's face was a mask of ice, but Mara could feel the fury radiating from him in waves. "Doctor," he said, his voice dangerously soft, "you look tired. Go home and rest. We'll discuss your dedication to patient monitoring another time." The surgeon's face went chalk white as he backed toward the door, nearly stumbling in his haste to escape. Guards materialized to escort him out as Adrian gave rapid-fire orders to lock down the wing. Mara finished the last stitch, her fingers nimble and sure, despite the tension crackling through the room. She applied a sterile dressing, hyper-aware of every breath, every small movement. The baby shifted restlessly inside her, responding to her heightened alertness. "Sweep everything," Adrian commanded. "Every room, every device, every shadow." His good hand caught Mara's wrist as she stepped back, his grip gentle despite his obvious anger. "Stay close." The next hours passed in a blur of controlled chaos as security teams moved through the wing with detection equipment. Tomasz coordinated with tech specialists, his usual reserve hardened into something sharp and dangerous. Cade prowled the corridors like a caged predator, his customary humor replaced by lethal focus. As midnight approached, Adrian ordered a complete system purge. Security feeds throughout the estate went dark one by one, plunging sections of the house into digital silence. Mara retreated to their room, and when had she started thinking of it as theirs? Sitting cross-legged on the vast bed, with the burner phone Adrian had given her resting on her knee. The baby moved again, a series of soft kicks against her palm. Tap, 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 like Morse code from some future she couldn't quite decode. The darkness pressed against the windows, held at bay by the warm glow of a single lamp. Somewhere in the house, people she barely knew were hunting for threats in the shadows, dismantling cameras, tracing signals back to their source. She ran her fingers over the cheap plastic of the phone, remembering the weight of Adrian's blood on her hands just hours before. The stitches she'd placed would hold, assuming he didn't push himself too hard. But men like him rarely rested when threats loomed. Her medical supplies were still laid out on the bathroom counter, ready if needed again. The room felt both safer and more dangerous than before, a contradiction that seemed to define everything about her new life. The baby kicked again, stronger this time, and Mara pressed her hand against the spot. Whatever came next, she had to stay alert, had to keep reading the room, the people, the shifting currents of power and danger that swirled around them. In the silence, she could hear distant footsteps in the corridor, guards passing on their rounds, she assumed. The lock on her door was engaged, the balcony sealed tight. She was protected, imprisoned, or both. The phone sat heavy on her knee, a lifeline to the man whose blood she'd just washed from her hands. The baby's movements settled into a gentle rhythm, like a heartbeat or a countdown. Mara stayed still, breathing slowly, listening to the quiet and waiting for whatever would come next. She had survived the streets, survived tonight, and she would survive whatever tomorrow brought. The stitches in Adrian's shoulder would hold. The cameras were found. But somewhere in the dark, a traitor was still moving pieces on the board, and the game was far from over. Morning light crept across Tomasz's desk as he examined the transmitter through a magnifying lens, his normally steady hands betraying the slightest tremor. Scattered around him were shipping manifests, each bearing the Wolf family sigil, a snarling wolf's head in raised silver ink. But something was wrong with the paper, the watermark slightly off. "The shipments were compromised," he announced, voice tight with controlled anger. "Every single one contaminated. They've been replacing our legitimate goods with counterfeits for months." He spread out a timeline of deliveries, each marked with red flags. The plan was elegant: turn the city against you without Calderon ever showing his hand. Adrian stood at the window, his injured shoulder held, carefully still. "Show me!" Cade burst through the door, leather jacket dark with river spray. "You need to see this." His usual swagger was replaced by urgent intensity. "Now!" They drove to the riverfront in tense silence, Mara wedged between Adrian and Cade in the back of the armored SUV. The warehouse loomed ahead, rust-streaked walls rising against gray skies. Inside, their footsteps echoed off concrete as Cade led them to a storage unit. He kicked the door open with unnecessary force. The metal rang like a bell. Inside, more manifests spilled from opened boxes. But these were different, older, water-stained. Tomasz rifled through them, muttering calculations under his breath. His head snapped up. "These intersect with—" He stopped, looking at Mara. She knew that address, had been trying not to remember it for months. The car ride back was suffocating. Mara's hands twisted in her lap as the familiar streets rolled past. Finally, she forced the words out, each one like swallowing glass. "It was a mezzanine," she said. Her voice sounded distant to her own ears. "Above the main floor, I could hear sirens, but they were so far away, useless." Adrian went absolutely still beside her. Even his breathing seemed to pause. The carpets were wrapped in plastic. When I jumped, they didn't really break my fall. Her ribs ached with phantom pain. "But I saw something, his hand, when he reached for me, a ring." Cade leaned forward. "What kind of ring?" "Gold. Heavy. A crest I'd never seen before." She swallowed. "But I know now. It was Calderon's, their family heirloom. He wanted me to see it, to know exactly who—" She couldn't finish. Adrian's control slipped, just for a moment. A sharp intake of breath, a microscopic crack in his perfect veneer. His hand moved toward hers, then stopped, hovering in the space between them. Back at the estate, security doubled, then tripled. Guards posted at every entrance, patrolling in tight formations. Cade orchestrated the rotations himself, switching patterns randomly to prevent prediction. Tomasz disappeared into his office with the manifest, determined to unravel every thread of the conspiracy. Thunder rolled in from the water as evening approached, the air growing thick with approaching rain. Adrian stationed 2 men outside Mara's door, another pair on the balcony below. His expression was carved from stone as he checked the locks himself. "The baby?" he asked quietly. Active today." She tried to smile, but couldn't quite manage it. "Probably all the excitement." He nodded once, sharp and precise. "Call if—" "I know." Night fell like a curtain. Mara lay in bed, counting seconds between thunderclaps. 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3. The baby kicked, strong and sure. She placed her hand over the spot, feeling the rhythm. Kick, thunder, kick, thunder. The storm moved closer, lightning painting stark shadows on the walls. Guard rotations past her door with metronomic precision. Each flash illuminated. The room in freeze-frame moments, the heavy curtains, the locked balcony doors, the phone on her nightstand. Another kick, another rumble of thunder. The baby danced beneath her palm, either excited by or protesting the atmospheric pressure. Mara stared at the ceiling, tracking the paths of raindrops on the windows by sound alone. She could hear Cade's voice in the hallway giving quiet orders. Footsteps approached, paused, moved on. The estate breathed around her like a living thing, alert and watchful. Somewhere, Tomas was still working, piecing together the puzzle of betrayal. And Adrian, she wondered if he was sleeping, if the stitches in his shoulder pulled with every movement. The thunder crashed closer, and the baby kicked harder in response. Mara counted again. 1, 1,000. Kick. 2, 1,000. Thunder. 3, 1,000. Kick. The rhythm steadied her, gave her something to focus on besides memories of plastic-wrapped carpets and the glint of gold on reaching hands. Lightning split the sky, and for a moment everything was stark white silence. Then darkness again, and the low growl of thunder rolling across the water. The baby shifted, settling into a new position. Mara kept counting, kept breathing, kept her eyes fixed on the ceiling as the storm raged outside and her thoughts circled like restless birds. 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, kick, thunder, guard rotation, kick, thunder. The night stretched endless before her, each moment marked by movement and sound. The baby's kicks, strong and certain, the storm's fury, moving ever closer. And beneath it all, the quiet certainty that somewhere in the city, behind the rain and lightning, someone was watching, waiting, planning their next move. The storm hit like a hammer, rattling windows and flooding gutters across the district. Lightning forked across the sky in vicious branches, and somewhere in the distance, a transformer exploded with a sound like artillery fire. The estate's lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. Mara was halfway up the service stairs when the generator stuttered. The emergency lights dimmed to amber, then died completely. In the sudden darkness, a cramp seized her abdomen with such shocking force that her knees buckled. She caught herself against the wall, breath hitching as pain rolled through her in waves. "No," she whispered, one hand pressed to her belly. "Not yet. Please, not yet." Footsteps thundered above and below as security scrambled to assess the outage. A beam of flashlight cut through the darkness, and Adrian's voice carried down the stairwell. "Status report." "Here," Mara managed between clenched teeth. Another cramp hit, stronger than the first. She slid down the wall, trying to remember how to breathe. The light found her, and Adrian was there in 3 long strides. Without hesitation or comment, he handed his flashlight to Cade and lifted her into his arms. She wanted to protest, to insist she could walk. But the next, contraction stole her words. "Medical wing," Adrian ordered, already moving. "Get Dr. Chen." They climbed through darkness, broken only by candlelight and scattered beams from security's flashlights. Adrian's stride never faltered, even carrying her dead weight up 3 flights. His voice stayed low and steady in her ear, marking time between contractions. "Breathe through it," he murmured. 7 seconds in, 11 out. "Focus on my count." She pressed her face against his shoulder, fingers curled in his shirt. The pain peaked and receded like waves, and she clung to his voice like an anchor. 7 in. That's it. 11 out. Again. The backup generator coughed to life as they reached the medical wing. Fluorescent lights hummed and blinked, casting everything in harsh relief. Dr. Chen was already waiting, equipment ready. "On the bed," she directed. "How far apart are the contractions?" 4 minutes, Adrian answered before Mara could speak. He set her down with careful precision, but didn't step away. The examination was quick and thorough. Monitors beeped, measuring heart rates and blood pressure. Dr. Chen's hands were gentle but sure as she checked dilation and position. "False labor," she announced finally. "The baby's heartbeat is strong and regular, no signs of distress." Relief made Mara dizzy. The contractions were already spacing out, fading to dull aches. Dr. Chen prescribed rest and hydration, then stepped out to update security. Exhausted, Mara slumped against the wall in the hallway. Adrian sat across from her, his usual perfect posture relaxed slightly. Between them, a candle burned low in its holder, throwing soft shadows across the marble floor. "Thank you," Mara said quietly. "For the stairs." He inclined his head, the gesture almost formal. In the candlelight, the angles of his face seemed softer somehow. The question slipped out before she could stop it. "What did you wait for? Outside a delivery room?" For a long moment, he was silent. The candle flame wavered, and wax pooled at its base. "A son," he said finally. His voice was stripped of its usual careful control. "And my wife." Understanding hit like another contraction. What happened? Someone was paid to step away, to look the other way, to be conveniently absent when complications arose. His hands, always so steady, tightened on his knees. By the time I reached them, it was too late. The truth hung in the air between them, making it somehow easier to breathe. Outside, the storm began to ease, rain softening from deluge to steady patter. "I'm sorry," Mara whispered. He met her eyes across the candlelight. "So am I." Dr. Chen returned with a wheelchair and strict instructions for bed rest. Adrian didn't argue when she insisted on walking the last few steps to her room, but his hand hovered near her elbow. The storm had passed by dawn, leaving behind puddles and scattered leaves. Mara lay in bed, watching pink light creep across the ceiling. For the first time, Adrian stayed, dozing in the chair beside her. His tie was loosened, jacket draped over the armrest. The gun on his thigh caught early sunlight. She studied him through heavy eyes, the way sleep smoothed the sharpness from his features, the steady rise and fall of his chest. His presence should have made her nervous, but instead, she felt oddly safe. The baby shifted, a gentle movement, nothing like the earlier false contractions. Mara placed her hand over the spot, smiling slightly. In his chair, Adrian didn't stir. She thought about the stairs, about his voice counting breaths, about candlelight and hard truths shared in darkness, about the way he'd carried her without hesitation or complaint, as if her weight was nothing. Sleep tugged at her, and she didn't fight it. The room was warm and quiet, filled with soft morning light. Adrian's breathing matched hers, slow and deep. Outside, birds began their dawn chorus. Mara drifted off, knowing he would be there when she woke, gun ready, guard down just enough to rest beside her. The truth of his loss hung between them like the lingering scent of candle smoke, bitter but somehow cleansing. The last thing she saw before sleep took her was his hand, relaxed on the chair arm. No ring, no crest, just the pale line where one used to be, marking another truth shared in the storm-dark night. The estate settled around them as morning crept in. Somewhere, Cade coordinated shift changes while Tomasz chased paper trails. But here, in this room touched by dawn, there was only quiet breathing and the promise of rest. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto polished marble, casting prismatic shadows across the gala's opulent ballroom. Mara's black evening gown whispered against the floor as Adrian guided her through the crowd, his hand steady at the small of her back. Every camera flash felt like lightning, documenting their entrance for tomorrow's society pages. "Smile," Adrian murmured, his lips barely moving. But not too widely. Let them wonder. She understood the game now. This wasn't just a charity event, but a calculated move in their ongoing chess match. Adrian had dressed her in a gown that accentuated her pregnancy while remaining elegantly modest, a clear message to anyone watching. She was his, protected, claimed. The whispers followed them like perfume. Wolf's new wife! The pregnancy. So sudden. Mara kept her chin high, mimicking Adrian's practiced indifference. Her hand rested in the crook of his arm, the picture of matrimonial harmony. The weight of her wedding ring felt both foreign and anchoring. They moved through the crowd with careful precision. Adrian nodded to business associates, deflected probing questions with practiced ease, and never let Mara stray more than inches from his side. She noticed how others gave them space, whether from respect or fear. The first warning was subtle, Adrian's arm tensing beneath her hand. Then she saw him, Enzo Calderone, cutting through the crowd. Like a shark through still water, he was beautiful in the way that deadly things often are, all sleek lines and practiced charm. His tuxedo probably cost more than most cars, and his smile could have cut glass. "Mr. and Mrs. Wolf," he purred, lifting a champagne flute in mock salute. "How domestic you look." Adrian's posture shifted minutely, angling his body between Mara and Enzo. Calderone, enjoying the evening? Immensely. Enzo's eyes slid to Mara, lingering on her swollen belly. Although I must say, you've surprised us all with this hasty marriage. Tell me, Adrian. He leaned closer, voice dropping to a venomous whisper. Does she tell you the baby isn't mine? The words hung in the air like poison gas. Mara felt Adrian go absolutely still beside her, the kind of stillness that preceded violence. Nearby conversations continued, oblivious to the knife-edge tension beneath the chandeliers. She kept her face carefully blank, though her heart hammered against her ribs. Around them, 1,000 smartphone cameras waited for any hint of scandal. Adrian's response was perfectly measured, pitched to carry no further than their small circle. Careful, Enzo, you wouldn't want to make a scene. Of course not, Enzo's smile widened. This is, after all, a charity event. Speaking of which, I should make my rounds. Give my best to the happy mother-to-be. He glided away, leaving his poison to work in their veins. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced smiles and careful movements. Adrian never left her side, but she felt the new tension in his frame, the way his eyes tracked Enzo through the crowd. Finally, they were in the bulletproof town car, the privacy partition raised. The city lights streaked past like tears on the dark glass. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken questions. Mara pressed her hands against her belly, gathering courage. I need to tell you something. Adrian didn't speak, but she felt his attention sharpen in the darkness. I never saw his face, she began, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. It was dark, and he grabbed me from behind. But I saw the ring when he reached for me, Enzo's family ring. I know that crest. She swallowed hard, staring at the tinted window. I kept the baby because ending a life wouldn't undo what happened. It wouldn't make the crime go away. And this child, my child, deserves a chance at life, regardless of how they came to be. The car's interior was silent except for their breathing. Then she heard it, a small, broken sound from Adrian. She turned to find him bowed forward, his head in his hands, shoulders shaking with silent grief or rage or both. Slowly, carefully, he lowered his head to her lap. She felt the tremors running through his body, the way his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He didn't cry. She suspected he'd forgotten how, but his breathing was ragged, uneven. They stayed that way until the car pulled into the estate's circular drive. Before they stepped out, Adrian straightened his tie with hands that weren't quite steady. Inside, the house was quiet except for their footsteps on marble. At her bedroom door, Adrian turned to face her. His eyes were red-rimmed but dry, his voice rough with emotion. No one touches you, he said, each word carved in stone. Not ever again. Not even me. Not unless you ask. You have my word. Mara felt tears prick her eyes for the first time that night. She nodded once, a sharp, jerky movement. The space between them felt both vast and intimate. Adrian's hands were fisted at his sides, as if physically restraining himself from reaching for her. The hall light caught the gleam of his wedding ring, so different from the one that haunted her memories. She could see the cost of his vow in the tension of his shoulders, the careful distance he maintained. This was a man accustomed to taking what he wanted, now choosing to wait, to ask, to let her set the pace. The baby kicked, a gentle reminder of life continuing despite everything. Mara pressed a hand to the spot, watched Adrian's eyes track the movement with a mix of protection and pain. They stood there in the quiet hallway, two people bound by paper and circumstance, united against a common enemy. The glitter of the gala seemed a lifetime away. Morning light filtered through the city's smog as Mara scrolled through her phone, jaw tightening. Social media exploded with carefully edited clips from the gala, moments twisted to suggest scandal, uncertainty, weakness. Comment sections filled with venom about her marriage's legitimacy. They're saying the ceremony wasn't valid, she told Adrian, who stood by the window watching traffic patterns below. 3 different priests have made statements. Bought priests, he corrected without turning. His reflection in the glass was granite hard. Calderone's trying to invalidate our protection. On the street, another convoy of trucks with the Calderone family crest rolled past, marking territory. They'd been circling maternity clinics all morning, a show of force meant to intimidate. Adrian's response was ruthlessly efficient. Within hours, dock workers loyal to him had shuttered keyports. Bank accounts linked to Calderone businesses mysteriously froze. Suppliers began calling to pledge exclusive contracts to the Wolf family. But Mara saw a different battlefield. While Adrian waged economic warfare, she picked up her phone and started making calls. First to Maria at the women's shelter, then to Rosa, who ran the corner store, then to dozens more. Mothers, sisters, grandmothers, who knew the weight of vulnerability. "We protect our own," she told them, and they understood. By afternoon, the first convoy formed, not of armored cars, but of women. They linked arms and walked beside a nervous mother-to-be, shielding her from shouted threats and camera flashes as she entered the clinic. Then another. Tomasz reported this development to Adrian with raised eyebrows. The neighborhood women have organized some kind of protection detail. Adrian watched from his office as another line of women moved past the gates. His expression shifted minutely. Pride, perhaps, or recognition of a strategy he hadn't considered. Mara kept meticulous paper records of the convoy schedule, refusing to trust anything digital. She wrote names and times in a small notebook she carried everywhere, coordinating the growing network of volunteers who showed up rain or shine. "Smart," Cade commented, watching her work. "Can't hack paper." The day's tension built like a thunderhead until it broke near midnight. The crash of breaking glass shattered the bedroom's quiet. Mara jerked awake as something heavy thumped against the floor, shards skittering across marble to where her bare feet touched down. Security burst in as she backed away from the brick wrapped in cruel spirals of barbed wire. A note fluttered beside it, the threat explicit: "Your next appointment will be your last." Adrian arrived moments later, his rage a palpable thing barely contained beneath his controlled exterior. He surveyed the damage with clinical detachment, but his hands were white-knuckled at his sides. "Double her security detail," he ordered Tomasz. "No windows open, ever, full sweep of surrounding buildings. I want whoever threw this found by morning." Mara stood in her nightgown, glass crunching under her slippers, and felt an answering anger rise. Different from Adrian's cold fury, but no less potent. While he issued commands, she retrieved her convoy notebook and added another name to tomorrow's schedule. They could throw all the bricks they wanted. She wouldn't stop helping others find safety. The baby kicked sharply, as if registering protest at being woken. Mara pressed a hand to the spot, and Adrian's attention immediately shifted to the movement. "Are you hurt?" he asked, voice dropping to that private register he used only with her. "No, just angry." She met his eyes. "They think they can scare us into submission." "They'll learn otherwise." The promise in his voice was lethal. Hours later, with the window boarded and the glass swept away, they stood in the ruined bedroom. An arm's length separated them, close enough to touch, far enough to honor boundaries. The baby kicked again, strong enough that they both could see the movement through her nightgown. "Hey, little one," Mara said softly, speaking to her belly. "I know it's been a rough night, but we're not going anywhere. We don't break that easily." Adrian watched the interaction, something raw and protective crossing his face. Then carefully he addressed the visible movement beneath Mara's hand. "Your mother's right," he said, his voice carrying the weight of an oath. "We won't bend. Not to threats, not to fear, not to any force they bring against us. You have my word." The baby kicked once more, as if acknowledging their promises. Mara smiled faintly. Their first real audience together, witnesses to vows that felt more binding than any courthouse ceremony. They remained that way for a long moment. Mara with her hand curved protectively over her belly, Adrian standing guard with the city's lights painting shadows across his face, and between them the unborn child, who had somehow become the center of a war neither of them had chosen, but both would fight to win. The night stretched quiet around them, but it was a different kind of quiet than before, not the silence of fear or distance, but of shared purpose and growing trust. Whatever Calderon planned next, he would find them standing firm, protecting not just themselves, but every vulnerable person who needed shelter in their shadow. Outside, the first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky. Soon the morning convoy would gather, mothers and grandmothers and sisters linking arms against the world's cruelty. Mara's notebook sat ready on the nightstand, filled with names and times, a paper shield against digital shadows. Sunlight struck harsh angles through the estate windows as Tomasz burst into Adrian's office at noon, his normally composed face ashen. Papers trembled in his hands. "Sir, I found the leak," his voice cracked. "The surveillance equipment, the counterfeit pipeline, it all traces back to our medical wing." Adrian's pen stilled mid-signature. "Explain." "Dr. Reynolds." Tomasz laid out financial records, dates, transfers. "He's been on Calderon's payroll for years. The same." He swallowed hard. The same doctor who was on call the night Elena and Marcus. The pen snapped in Adrian's grip, ink bleeding across the papers like spilled blood. 8 years of controlled grief crystallized into something darker as the pieces aligned. The doctor who had stepped away from the operating table while his wife and son slipped away, claiming equipment failure, accepting condolences with downcast eyes. Where is he now? In his office, routine checkup reports. Adrian moved with lethal purpose through the corridors, Tomasz at his heels. The doctor looked up with practiced concern as they entered, the same expression he'd worn while delivering news of Elena's death. "Mr. Wolf, is everything—" Adrian's hand locked around the doctor's throat, dragging him from his chair. The man's eyes bulged as recognition hit, not of violence, but of discovery. "The music room," Adrian ordered. "Now." They marched their prisoner down empty halls to the sealed piano room where Elena had once played Chopin. Dustcloth still draped the furniture like burial shrouds. Adrian shoved the doctor into a chair and pressed his gun to the man's temple. "Start talking!" The words came arctic cold. "Every detail, every payment, every time you looked me in the eye knowing what you'd done." The doctor's composure cracked. "Mr. Wolf, please, it wasn't personal." "My wife, my son, their lives weren't personal." Calderone. "Offered, the money was. I had debts." "Had?" The gun pressed harder. "Present tense, you're still his creature, aren't you? Still planting bugs? Still betraying my house?" "I can explain." "Enough." The word came quiet but firm from the doorway. Mara stood there, one hand braced on her belly, the other steady against the frame. "What?" Adrian didn't lower the gun, but his eyes found hers. "A dead man can't testify." She stepped into the room. But a living confession, documented and distributed, that destroys Calderone's whole network. "He deserves." "Yes." Her voice held steel. "He deserves whatever you do to him. But we need him alive. His words will hurt Calderone more than his blood." The muscles in Adrian's jaw worked as he processed her logic through the haze of vengeance. The doctor trembled, sweat darkening his collar. "Tomasz," Mara continued, "get your phone. Record everything. Every name, every account, every connection. Timestamp it all." The consigliere already had his device out, nodding approval. "She's right, sir. This could unravel their entire operation." Long seconds ticked by as Adrian wrestled with 8 years of grief, demanding satisfaction. Finally, the gun lowered fractionally. "Talk," he told the doctor. "Every detail. And understand, the only reason you're breathing is because she says so." The confession spilled out in desperate rushes. Offshore accounts, shell companies, the exact amount paid for Elena's death. Names of other plants in other organizations. The whole architecture of Calderone's intelligence network laid bare, as Tomasz recorded and took notes. "The bugs in the medical cart?" Mara prompted. "Installed 3 months ago. Weekly data drops at the marina." "The counterfeits?" "Warehouse 17, marked with duplicated wolf seals. Shipping manifests altered too." "Dates," Adrian cut in. "Times, account numbers, everything." For 2 hours, they extracted every detail, every connection. The doctor's voice grew hoarse, but Adrian's gun remained steady, a constant reminder of mercy's price. When the confession was complete, Tomasz verified the recording and his notes. "It's comprehensive, sir. This will collapse at least 3 of their major operations." "Take him to the safe house on Burton Street," Adrian ordered. "Full security, no contact. He lives until the information is verified and distributed." Guards appeared to escort the doctor out. He stumbled once, looking back at Mara with desperate gratitude. She met his gaze coldly. "Don't thank me," she said. "I didn't spare you for your sake." When the room emptied, Adrian stood motionless by the dust-covered piano, gun still in hand. The weapon trembled slightly, the only visible sign of the war between ingrained violence and chosen restraint. Mara moved closer, careful to telegraph her approach. "You did the right thing." The right thing would be his body in the river. The right thing is whatever hurts them most. She gestured to the phone, containing the confession. "This hurts them more than one more death." His laugh held no humor. "When did you become the tactical one?" "When you needed someone to see past revenge to strategy." She stepped closer. "I understand wanting him dead. But you're better than that. Smarter than that." The gun lowered completely as Adrian turned to face her. Something raw and wounded moved behind his eyes. Grief never properly expressed, justice long denied. I watched them die, he said softly. For 8 years, I thought it was fate. Bad luck. Now I know it was him, standing there, watching, taking their money. And now he'll watch everything he built for them crumble. Mara's voice held quiet conviction. That's a longer punishment than death. Adrian's free hand clenched, then deliberately relaxed. The gun disappeared into its holster as he mastered himself through force of will. How do you do that? He asked. Do what? Make mercy sound like victory? She smiled faintly. Because sometimes it is. They stood in the music room's dusty quiet, surrounded by shrouded furniture and old ghosts. Adrian's breathing slowly steadied as the killing rage ebbed, replaced by a different kind of strength, the kind that chose restraint not from weakness but from wisdom. I'm not canceling. Mara checked her phone, scrolling through the convoy schedule with determined fingers. 2 girls from St. Mary's need escorts to their appointments. They have no one else. Adrian's jaw tightened, the muscle there flexing beneath his skin. His eyes had gone cold, calculating. After what happened at the gala... Exactly why I need to go, Mara cut in, meeting his gaze without flinching. Enzo wants us scared, hiding behind these walls like prisoners. I won't let those girls face his thugs alone, not when they're already terrified. She could see him calculating risks, mapping threat scenarios in that precise, methodical mind of his. His eyes flicked to her swollen belly, then back to her face. Finally, he nodded once, the movement sharp as a blade. Double security detail, no arguments. Cade handpicks every man. The autumn afternoon held a bitter edge as Mara stepped through the estate gates, the wind carrying the scent of decaying leaves and impending frost. 6 guards moved into formation with practiced efficiency. 2 ahead scanning the street, 2 behind watching their backs, 2 flanking her sides. The teenage girls huddled close to her, their thin jackets pulled tight around their shoulders, eyes darting nervously at every passing car. It's okay, Mara assured them, one hand resting protectively on her 7-month belly, feeling the reassuring flutter of movement beneath her palm. We've got this down to a science now. These men are the best at what they do. They made it 3 blocks before she noticed the delivery truck. White, unmarked, its engine idling too long at a corner. Nothing specific she could point to, but instinct made her skin prickle with, warning. She tapped her phone, fingers flying across the screen, sending their location to Adrian without breaking stride. The truck's rear doors exploded open with a metallic bang that echoed down the street. Men in black masks poured out like smoke, fluid and coordinated, weapons glinting dully in the afternoon light. Run! Mara shoved the girls toward the nearest storefront, pushing them ahead of her. Inside now! Smoke grenades clattered across the sidewalk, hissing as they released thick gray clouds that turned the world to disorienting fog. Rough hands grabbed her arms from behind. She thrashed wildly, teeth bared in animal fury, catching flesh through fabric. Someone cursed viciously when she connected. They were dragging her backward toward the van, her heels scraping painfully against concrete. Tires screamed around the corner, Adrian's convoy arriving at full speed, black SUVs skidding to violent stops. Gunfire erupted, sharp cracks splitting the air through the smoke. Bodies hit pavement with heavy thuds. Mara fought harder as they tried to force her into the van, using every dirty trick she'd ever learned. She caught a glimpse of Adrian diving through the open doors, pure fury transforming his usually controlled expression into something primal and terrifying. Every line of his body promised violence as he ripped a mask off the nearest attacker. The face underneath wasn't Enzo's hired muscle as she'd expected. It was younger, scared. Jamie Moretti, Cade's teenage brother with his too young face and wide, frightened eyes. A nobody bought cheap for a job too big for him. I'm sorry, Jamie stammered, blood trickling from his split lip. They promised my mother would get her medicine. The words cut off abruptly as Adrian's fist connected with devastating precision. In the chaos, a thug panicked. He shoved Mara hard, sending her stumbling backward. Her hip caught the van's steel ribs with bruising force. Pain exploded through her abdomen, white hot and terrifying. A gush of warmth trickled down her legs. The world fuzzed to static, sounds warping around her. Voices shouted, distorted and distant. Get her up! The clinic now! Oh, losing too much blood. Oh, the baby. Darkness swallowed everything like a hungry tide. She surfaced to antiseptic smell and harsh fluorescent glare that stabbed at her eyes. A woman in blue scrubs stood over her, clipboard clutched in bony fingers. Something about her posture set off alarm bells in Mara's foggy mind. Sign here. The woman thrust papers at her with barely disguised impatience. Emergency guardianship. Standard procedure when we need to operate. Mara's head swam, thoughts slipping like fish through her fingers. Wrong! Something was wrong. This didn't feel like safety. Where am I? Sign, or you might wake up without that baby, the woman said, her voice dropping to a hiss. Accidents happen in surgery. Complications no one could predict. The threat cleared Mara's fog like ice water dumped over her head. This wasn't Adrian's clinic. The woman's scrubs had no logos, no ID tags. The room held no monitoring equipment, just bare walls and a single door. Mara's hand found the IV stand beside the bed. In one fluid motion, she swung it into the woman's throat with all her strength. The clipboard clattered to the floor as the woman choked, staggering back with hands clutching her crushed windpipe. Alarms shrieked as Mara ripped out her IV, ignoring the sharp sting and trickle of blood. Her bare feet hit cold tile with a slap. The thin hospital gown fluttered around her thighs as she ran, one hand pressed protectively against her belly. Shouts echoed behind her, growing louder. Heavy footsteps pounded down the hallway. She slammed through a series of doors, following red exit signs, each step sending shards of pain through her abdomen and lower back. A fire door burst open to night rain, cold droplets instantly soaking through her flimsy gown. Puddles splashed under her feet as she sprinted across wet pavement, her breath coming in ragged gasps that tore at her lungs. A chain-link fence loomed ahead, silhouetted against the stormy sky. Red and blue lights strobed through the darkness, painting the rain in alternating colors. Sirens wailed, converging from all directions, the sound bouncing off buildings in disorienting echoes. Mara ran, pushing her body past its limits. Her legs trembled beneath her, threatening to give out. The baby kicked frantically inside her, as though sharing her panic. But she couldn't stop. Not here. Not now. Not with Enzo's people closing in. Lightning cracked overhead, briefly illuminating the fence's razor wire in stark relief. Rain soaked her thin gown until it clung to her body like a second skin. Warm blood trickled down her legs, mingling with the cold rainwater. Still she ran, one hand pressed to her swollen belly, the other reaching for freedom. Each step was a promise to her child. I will not let them take you? Behind her, car doors slammed in quick succession. Authoritative voices shouted commands that were swallowed by thunder. Flashlight beams cut through the rain, sweeping across the yard in searching patterns. But ahead was the fence. Beyond it, darkness. Somewhere in that darkness was Adrian, hunting for her with single-minded determination. She just had to reach it, just had to hold on long enough for him to find her. Mara's lungs burned like she'd swallowed fire. Her vision blurred, black spots dancing at the edges. The baby's kicks grew weaker, less frequent, sending fresh terror through her veins. Thunder rolled as she pushed herself forward, bare feet raw and bleeding on wet concrete. The fence drew closer with each desperate step, both salvation and obstacle. Sirens screamed louder, converging on her position. Rain fell harder, a deluge that washed away tracks but slowed her progress. And Mara ran, counting every footfall, every heartbeat, every labored breath, every moment toward escape or capture. She couldn't lose now. Not after everything she'd survived. Not with her baby's life hanging in the balance. Not when Adrian was out there, turning the city upside down to find her. So she ran through the storm, through the stabbing pain, through the bone-deep fear, ran toward the razor wire and whatever waited beyond. Freedom or a trap, hope or despair. The sirens crescendoed to an unbearable wail. Lightning flashed again, briefly turning night to blinding day, and Mara kept running, her feet striking puddles in desperate rhythm, each splash bringing her closer to salvation or doom, each step a defiant refusal to surrender what was hers. Adrian's shoulders hit concrete as uniformed officers dragged him from the van. Rain pelted his face while they recited charges from a warrant that stank of convenience, counterfeit shipments, contaminated goods, public endangerment. "This is manufactured," he snarled, but steel cuffs clicked anyway. Through the precinct windows, he watched the city darken. Every minute they held him was another minute Mara slipped further away. His wet clothes dried slowly in the interrogation room, while a clock ticked like a bomb. Tomasz arrived in a fury of papers and precedents, tablet glowing with emergency motions. "They falsified shipping manifests. We have proof." "How long?" "Hours, maybe less." Tomasz's fingers flew over his phone. "The surgeon started talking the moment we showed him photos of the warehouse where they're moving product." Adrian's knuckles whitened. "The same warehouse." "Where they held her before, yes." The holding cell door finally opened at sunset. Adrian emerged like a storm front, darkness gathering behind his eyes. Tomasz handed him a gun and an address before he reached the street. She's there. The surgeon's phone showed multiple visits today. Medical supplies delivered this morning. Adrian didn't wait for more. He took a car himself, tires screaming on wet pavement as he cut through back streets toward the waterfront. The warehouse rose against pewter clouds, a hulking shape of rust and steel that matched Mara's broken descriptions. He killed the engine a block away and moved on foot through shadows. 2 guards at the loading dock, 3 more patrolling the fence line. Amateur muscle, not Calderon's usual crews. The power box yielded to 1 clean shot. Lights died across the complex, plunging the interior into darkness that felt like home. Adrian slipped inside as backup generators sputtered and failed. He hunted by sound first, boots on metal stairs, voices echoing off concrete, and there, a syncopated pattern of footsteps. 1, 2, 1, 2, someone limping. Then scent, antiseptic tang, rain-wet cotton, the metallic note of blood. He followed it like a thread through the maze of shipping containers. A woman's voice rose in pain. Mara's voice. Adrian moved faster, staying in shadow. The footsteps grew closer. He heard her, labored breathing, the shuffle drag of bare feet on concrete. She emerged from behind a crate, hospital gown clinging to her curves, one hand pressed to her belly. In the dim emergency lights, her skin was too pale. His hands found her shoulders before she could scream. She stiffened, then sagged against his chest with a sob of pure relief. Adrian. He gathered her close, one arm supporting her back while the other kept his gun ready. Her skin was cold and damp. Can you walk? She nodded against his shoulder. Slowly. They moved together through the warehouse, past stacks of boxes labeled with clinic names. Adrian read each one, memorizing the evidence of Calderon's operation. Footsteps thundered on the catwalk above. Adrian spun, shielding Mara with his body as bullets sparked off metal. 2 quick shots, 2 bodies hitting grating. More men appeared at the end of the corridor. Adrian's gun spoke 3 times. They died quietly, efficiently, crumpling before they could radio for backup. Here. He guided Mara into a small office, securing the door. Tomasz is bringing cars to the loading dock. She sank into a chair, trembling. He found bottled water in a desk drawer and helped her drink. The baby? He asked softly. Mara pressed a hand to her stomach. Still moving. But the contractions... She closed her eyes. Not yet. Please, not yet. Adrian touched her belly gently, feeling the flutter of movement. His phone buzzed. Tomasz's signal. We're getting out, now! He gathered her close again, one arm under her knees. She looped her arms around his neck, face pressed to his shoulder. I knew you'd come, she whispered. Always. They moved through shadows toward the loading dock, Adrian's footsteps silent despite her added weight. The warehouse creaked around them, rain drumming on the metal roof. A door banged somewhere behind them. Voices shouted, flashlight beams cutting through darkness. Adrian quickened his pace. Mara's fingers dug into his shirt. The loading dock waited ahead, roll-up door raised just enough to show wet pavement and idling cars. Freedom just yards away, more shouting, running feet, the crack of gunfire. Adrian pressed Mara closer to his chest and moved faster, staying in the deepest shadows. Each step brought them closer to escape while chaos erupted behind them. She trembled against him, but her voice was steady when she spoke. They wanted the baby. They were going to take... Never. The word was a growl of promise. They'll never touch either of you. Tomasz appeared in the gap under the door, gun drawn. Clear! Adrian carried Mara the final steps toward safety, while rain misted through the opening. Behind them, the warehouse erupted in shouts and gunfire as Calderon's men discovered their prize slipping away. Inside the office, Mara's hands shook as she sipped more water. Her other hand never left her belly, monitoring each flutter of movement. Not yet, she whispered to their child. Not yet, just hold on. Adrian stood guard at the door, listening to Tomasz direct their exit strategy through his earpiece. Soon, they would run this gauntlet one final time. But for now, in this quiet moment, he watched Mara breathe through another contraction and swore silently that no one would ever cage her again. Rain pounded the loading bay doors as Enzo Calderon backed toward his waiting car, flanked by guards. His perfectly pressed suit was wrinkled now, his carefully maintained facade cracking at the edges. He froze when Tomasz stepped from the shadows, tablet glowing in the dim light. Going somewhere? Tomasz's voice carried over the storm. On the screen, the surgeon sat rigid in his chair, speaking clearly into the camera. May 15th, 6 years ago, 500,000 transferred through Shell Company Delta. Instructions were clear: step away from the operating room during complications. Enzo's face drained of color. You can't! October 12th this year, the surgeon continued. $2 million for surveillance equipment placed in the Wolf Estate medical wing. Inside the warehouse, Adrian moved like a predator through the darkness, gun trained on Lorenzo. The underboss had lost his mask in the struggle, revealing features twisted with spite. You wore Enzo's ring, Adrian said softly. The family heirloom. Tell me why. Lorenzo sneered, though his hands trembled. Because the prince was too weak to do what needed doing, always hiding behind proxies, keeping his hands clean while others did the work. Mara stood in the doorway, one hand pressed to her belly. Her hospital gown was soaked with rain, but her eyes burned. You assaulted me to frame him, she said, to clear your path to power. Smart girl. Lorenzo's laugh was bitter. Enzo's reputation would never recover from attacking a pregnant woman. The family would turn on him, and who would be there to step into the void? Adrian's finger tightened on the trigger. Give me one reason not to end you here. Wait! Mara's voice cut through the tension. She moved closer, fighting another contraction. This is my choice, my justice. Adrian turned to her, expression softening. What do you want? I want him alive. Her words were steel. I want the truth to live longer than fear. I want my child to grow up in a world where monsters face consequences in the light. Lorenzo spat. You think courts can touch us? Watch me, Mara said. Outside, police sirens wailed closer. Tomasz had made the calls, pulled the strings. News vans would arrive soon, cameras ready. Cuff him, Adrian ordered his men. Carefully, he's evidence now. They marched Lorenzo through the rain to where reporters gathered, cameras flashing. The confession played on screens, impossible to ignore. Prosecutors stood ready with warrants, badges gleaming. Enzo tried to slip away in the chaos, but Tomasz's men blocked every exit. The empire crumbled in real time, live on every network. Mara's gasp cut through Adrian's focus. She doubled over, gripping the doorframe. The baby, she breathed. It's time. Adrian swept her into his arms, barking orders. Clear a path. Get the car. The drive to the hospital was a blur of red lights and squealing tires. Real doctors this time, not bought men with hidden agendas. They whisked Mara into a delivery room while Adrian paced outside, gun still at his hip. Her cries echoed through the door. Each one tore at him, made his hands clench. But this pain had purpose, had hope at the end. Hours passed. Rain cleared to reveal stars. Adrian remembered another night of waiting, another delivery room, another hope that died in betrayal. But not this time. A baby's first cry split the night. Strong, defiant, alive. Adrian burst through the doors to find Mara exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle. She looked up at him with tears in her eyes. Come meet your daughter. He approached carefully, as if the scene might shatter. The baby was red-faced and perfect, tiny fingers curled into fists. A laugh bubbled up from his chest, broken and raw and real. The sound of a man waking from a long nightmare into light. Later, he stood at the nursery window while dawn painted the city gold. Behind the glass, his daughter slept peacefully in her bassinet. Mara rested in her room, finally safe. The city spread out below, its sharp edges softened by morning. Traffic flowed, people walked to work, life continued. But something had shifted. The grip of fear had loosened. Just a little. Tomasz appeared at his shoulder. Lorenzo's confession is everywhere. Enzo's lawyers can't contain it. The DA is moving fast. Adrian nodded, eyes still on his daughter. And the surgeon, singing like a bird, 20 years of secrets spilling out. Through the window, the baby stirred, tiny face scrunching. A nurse adjusted her blanket with gentle hands. Adrian pressed his palm to the glass. Yesterday, he would have killed for vengeance. Today, he would live for this tiny life that represented something new. The sun climbed higher, catching the hospital windows. Light spilled across the city that had seemed untouchable for so long. Now its machinery ground forward, processing truth, dispensing consequence. Behind him, Mara's monitors beeped steadily. Before him, his daughter dreamed her first dreams. Around him, the world turned toward justice, one revolution at a time. Morning light streamed through newly washed windows of the music room, catching dust motes that danced like memories being cleared away. The space felt different now, lighter, as if decades of silence had finally lifted. Gone were the heavy drapes that had shrouded the grand piano in shadows. Gone was the stillness that had pressed against the walls like a physical weight. Adrian's fingers hovered over the keys, hesitant at first. It had been years since he'd allowed himself this vulnerability. The first notes came softly, tentatively, like raindrops before a storm. A melody emerged, something classical but gentle, transformed by his touch into something new. Mara stood beside him, their week-old daughter sleeping peacefully in her arms. The baby's tiny breaths synced with the rhythm of the music. With infinite care, Mara laid their child in the natural curve of the piano, cushioned by blankets. The instrument's polished surface reflected their daughter's peaceful face like dark water. "I want in," Mara said quietly, her voice steady and certain. "Not as a figurehead, not as someone to be protected, as a partner, on my terms." Adrian's hands stilled on the keys. He studied her face, noting the steel beneath her exhaustion, the unwavering determination that had drawn him from the start. Without a word, he stood and crossed to his briefcase, removing 3 folders. "I had Tomasz prepare these last night," he said, spreading the documents on the piano's gleaming surface. Full transfer of ownership of the estate to a trust, the clinic fund, reorganized as a legitimate foundation, the convoy network, formalized into a community protection program. He met her eyes. "You'll chair the board, full autonomy, no strings." Mara traced the legal language with her finger, absorbing the implications. "And if I wanted to walk away?" "These ensure you could. Clean break, no obligations." His voice roughened. "If that's what you truly want." She moved closer until they shared breath. "I choose to stay," she whispered against his lips. "Only tender to us." When she kissed him, it felt like a vow. Deeper than their courthouse ceremony, more binding than any contract. His hands came up to cradle her face, gentle despite the calluses earned through violence. Beyond their gates, the city was transforming. The trials dominated headlines. Calderon captains turning state's evidence, each revelation spawning new investigations. The priest who had denounced their marriage now testified under oath about pressure and payoffs. The counterfeit operation that had nearly destroyed them crumbled as suppliers rushed to cooperate. But the real change was happening in the neighborhoods. Women who had walked in Mara's convoys now organized their own protection networks. Clinic waiting rooms filled with patients who finally felt safe seeking care. The streets grew quieter as people realized the force keeping peace wasn't built on fear anymore. And at the center of it all, in a fortress slowly becoming a home, Adrian Wolfe rocked a bassinet at 2 a.m., humming old lullabies while his wife slept. The man who had ruled through calculated brutality now measured his success in his daughter's peaceful breaths. Thunder rumbled distantly as evening gathered. In the estate's garden, where roses climbed trellises without razor wire, a small group had assembled. Tomasz raised a glass, his usual precision softened by genuine warmth. "To mercy made dangerous," he toasted, and the others, Cade, the loyal guards, the women who had walked with Mara, echoed the sentiment. As the guests departed, leaving behind empty glasses and conversation echoes, Adrian and Mara stood in the growing dusk. Their daughter slept against Mara's shoulder, tiny fingers curled around a strand of her mother's hair. The air hung heavy with rain and possibility. Adrian drew them both close, one hand spanning Mara's back while the other cradled their child's head. The gesture contained multitudes, protection and partnership, strength and surrender, a future built on choice rather than force. "You are mine forever," he murmured into her hair. Mara's free hand fisted in his shirt, anchoring them together. "Good," she breathed, "and you are mine." The estate gates hummed closed behind the last car, sealing them in their transformed world. Somewhere in the city, prosecutors built cases and witnesses testified, and justice ground forward. But here, in this moment, there was only the sound of their daughter's soft breaths, the distant thunder, and the weight of promises kept. The garden's motion sensors cast gentle light across the roses, catching raindrops that had begun to fall. No more razors hidden in stems, no more threats wrapped in beauty, just flowers reaching toward sky, thorns existing as nature intended, protection without malice. They stood there as the storm drew closer, neither willing to break the spell. Through the open music room windows, the piano gleamed in lamplight, its surface still holding the echo of their daughter's peaceful rest. The instrument that had been sealed away in grief now stood ready for new melodies, new memories, new life. Inside, the estate hummed with subtle changes. Guards still patrolled, but their movements felt more like protection than imprisonment. Security cameras watched, but their feed now went to people who had earned trust. Power remained, but it had been transformed. Tempered by mercy, strengthened by choice, dangerous in defense rather than aggression. The city seemed to exhale, as if it too felt the shift. Streets that had been battlegrounds became neighborhoods again. Clinics that had been weaponized returned to their true purpose. And in the quiet spaces between old power and new possibility, people began to breathe easier, to walk taller, to believe in justice that didn't require violence to maintain its hold. The rain fell harder now, but they remained in their embrace, sheltered by the garden's latticed roof. Their daughter stirred briefly, then settled deeper into sleep, secure in the knowledge that had taken her parents so long to learn, that safety could coexist with freedom, that protection didn't require possession, that love could be both fierce and gentle at once.